watching. Oops, let me just prove this. I was very anxiously, watching this case and to see what was going to unfold. And in April, the plaintiffs won their first their first hearing. They won the first like element of the case before Judge Aiken's court. Um, in April of 2016. So that was kind of the moment where I was like, okay, I think this is a story that I want to follow further, and I think it's going somewhere. So I went back to Julia and asked her if she would give me exclusive access to tell the story, and then it kind of just sprung from there. So it was a very long journey. It was a passion project. A lot of tears were shed, a lot of sweat was produced. I had a lot of help along the way from a lot of my film colleagues until I had the funding to actually pay for them. They helped me along the way. So it was definitely a love project, and I developed a very close relationship with these youth who today are still close in my life. And we finally decided to finish the the case is still going. So if I had decided to still continue filming the story, I the story would not be out there. A lot of people wouldn't know about it. But at some point in 2019, we decided that we needed to get the story out there, even if the case didn't have a resolution yet. So it was kind of that moment that we tried to figure out, okay, where is the story going and how can we finish this up? And so we kind of went into the post-production phase at that point, of course, not knowing that a pandemic was headed our way. So we started editing in November of 2019. Um, Pandemic hit, that really put a big yeah, it just was really hard. It was really hard to work on a film in the pandemic when you can't meet in person, you can't travel, all of these things. So there was a lot of road trips that were done between me and my editors. I had one editor in Colorado and one in New York, and I was, of course, in Bozeman. And so a lot of road trips between our three states and also out to LA to sound and color studios. But we managed to get the film done, and we had our premiere at Doc NYC in November of 2020. And then we released on Netflix. Gosh, I guess it was the spring of 2022. Yeah. So that's kind of been just like the journey with this film. And of course, this case is still ongoing. And it's really like the film did really well in film festivals around the world. We were so incredibly fortunate to have won over 50 festival awards around the world. Many of them grand juries or grand festival award, which was amazing, which has really helped the film to also get a lot of recognition and a lot of airtime. We also released on PBS as well, and so PBS has the live broadcast rights, and Netflix has the streaming rights. We also have an educational distributor, and we worked with um, some donors to help us put together a really strong curriculum, together with Journeys in Film, who put together a really great curriculum for grades 8 through 12. And we are working with Good Docs, who's our educational distributor, and we've been able to get the film into over 250 schools across the country, along with this curriculum. So it's been a big journey and really rewarding. And even here we are in 2025, and you guys are still holding a screening and watching the film. And I think the held case in Montana, of course, has really tied in nicely with folks being able to watch this film to understand a little bit more of the constitutional elements, even though the held case is, based on slightly different premises, but just even understanding the whole constitutional aspect of what these cases are based on, I think is really helpful.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, Awesome. And Libby, you can probably see the chat as well, Christy.
Yeah, I can open that up.
Thank you. And yeah, Libby, if at some point you have questions that you want to put in the chat or ask aloud, Christy, I'm hoping we might be able to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
Does anyone have?
Libby said it was easy to feel the depth of these kids' experiences and dedication to fighting climate change through the court system. Um, that's good. I'm glad. I'm glad that the experiences came through. It was really hard, like just from a filmmaking storytelling perspective. It was a complicated story to tell. You know, the such a complicated legal story and legal action, and so much history, and then you've got all of these plaintiffs and so many characters, and who do you focus on, and how do you weave that all together? And so it was. I can just give you like a little breakdown of kind of how we what was a fun element that we kind of figured out of how to tell the story. So we really wanted to tell it in 3 acts. And we were kind of struggling with, I knew from the get-go that I wanted to have the historical aspect and kind of this whistleblower component to the film, go back in history and be able to really show a lot of this archival. We had over 200 hours of archival footage that we had to sift through, and I had a presidential library researcher who went to many of the presidential libraries and found material for us. And so that was like part of the story. And then the plaintiff's stories for me were like the heart of the emotional, element to the story. And then of course we had the whole case, and I wanted that to feel very educational. And so we were kind of struggling as we were putting the film together, like how do we weave these together and tell the story? And then we realized, well, wait a second, we've got 3 elements of standing that a plaintiff has to prove in order for a case to be heard. Um, First, you have to prove that the plaintiff is harmed, and next you have to prove that the defendant caused that harm, and then you have to prove that the courts can provide that relief. And so we decided to actually build our story out based on the 3 elements of standing. And so those kind of created the storylines and the story modes that we kind of followed throughout the film.
Wow, that's an incredible progression that, yeah, really flowed in the film itself. Now that you've broken that down, I can totally that impacted. Yeah, do you have a question?
From the end of the movie, what is the next? Is there a precedent that's going to prevent this case from going forward, and how are they going to go around that negative or the 2-for-1 ruling? And is that going to harm other constitutional kind of attempts to future? Do you all have or is the lawyers, are they depressed, or are they saying, well, we'll back the hill from a different angle?
I think there was a lot of criticism, around this case from the legal community in the beginning, that if they were to get a bad ruling in the courts, that would set precedents for future climate cases. But in my understanding of talking with Julia and hearing her talk, she felt that this was a very strong case, and if you don't start somewhere in the courts, you're never going to move forward. And we saw that with the civil rights movement, and I think that was, definitely something that kind of kept her going on this. So the film ends with the Ninth Circuit Court the Ninth Circuit Court ruling, and of course a lot has happened since then. That was in, I think we updated that in the very beginning of 2022, right before we even had to update the film after our festivals and everything before the Netflix release. Um, so where the plaintiffs are today is the case went back to Judge Aiken, and she took a hell of a long time coming up with her decision. It was until after Biden was elected. So I think she almost sat on it for 2 years with her decision, and it was excruciating. But she came back and said that the case, should go back to trial um, in her court. And since then, the Department of Justice again, I think, filed their 7th writ of mandamus, trying to shoot it back to the Supreme Court. Then this last fall, or I think it was late summer, early fall, the plaintiffs they actually filed a petition for an appeal with the Ninth Circuit Court asking for an en banc review. That was then denied. So then they filed a motion, the plaintiffs actually filed a motion, a petition for writ with the Supreme Court. And that was then denied. And now they are asking for, they have now filed a petition for certiorari, which is basically asking the Supreme Court to rule on the issue of redressability. So where the film ends was basically the Ninth Circuit Court saying, we agree that the plaintiffs have been harmed and we agree that the government has caused that harm, but what we don't see is that we can provide relief. So at that point, the plaintiffs were asking for, they were asking for declaratory relief, but they were also asking for the courts to mandate these climate recovery plans. So they went back so the plaintiffs went back, and the case was denied without prejudice, meaning they could come back to the courts again with a petition. So they went back and asked Judge Aiken, will you please allow us to remove the now I'm blanking on the term. They basically asked the court, we're asking Judge Aiken, can we amend our complaint so that the entire focus is on declaratory relief? Similar to how Brown versus Board of Education was decided in 1954. They were first asking the courts to simply state that they have a constitutional right and that it is being violated. Don't worry about the other part right now. This is the only thing that we want the courts to rule on. And Judge Aiken granted that. She granted their motion to amend their complaint. And so right now the entire focus is on whether or not they have a constitutional right, whether it's violated, and whether courts can redress a constitutional harm. And has nothing to do with the climate recovery plans. That would be something that would happen later. And that's similar what happened in Brown versus Board in 1954. The courts ruled on the declaratory relief. They ruled that they were being harmed, and it wasn't until 1954 that they actually provided the secondary relief of actually stating that the schools had to desegregate. So this is kind of a similar premise that they have taken with the case of trying to first establish the constitutional right. So that's where they are now. You know, it's been 9.5 years. So it's kind of crazy for these plaintiffs. You know, most of them are growing up. Like they're not little kids anymore. So it's been very interesting to see that happening. And to your question, like, you know, has it been depressing? Has it been hard? Yeah, like every 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of scenario has been really challenging. But the Juliana case set precedents for the Held case, and now the Held case has had a really positive win in the courts, which is going to set precedents for other cases. So every one of these wins, every one of these positive steps is moving this whole entire judicial process forward for all of these cases and providing new precedents for other cases. So while a lot of climate attorneys, legal people, legal scholars were concerned about that in the beginning, I don't think that has necessarily turned out to be true.
Thinking of that. Anyone else?
Yeah, you mentioned in the beginning that obviously this isn't your first go round with filming and telling the story of climate issues and these kids and other kids' stories. How is this particular instance unique from the others, or what, I guess, what are the different elements you have to look at when you're telling these different stories, and how does, as the fact that this one doesn't have a conclusion yet, change how you tell that story or how you tell different stories? Maybe you get what I'm going for
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. Well, it definitely made the ending challenging, and that we really struggled with that for a really long time. We did a lot of test screenings along the way when we had like our rough cut and our fine cut, and with people we didn't know, you know, a really random group of ages and demographics to kind of understand where the story was landing. Our first ending, the first go around at it, you know, we had a question on our feedback form of what feelings, what are you, what's the feeling that you're left with at the end of the film, and um, the initial feedback that we got was like devastation, depression, uh, paralysis. You know, it was like it was like these really like, I mean, hard feelings to deal with, but also not active, not something that's gonna like, you know, leave the viewer wanting to do something. Like it was just like so kind of paralyzing. And we were like, okay, this like that doesn't work. That's not the ending that we want. We need to have some like it needs to be a little bit more uplifting or have some hope or like some other active emotion, right? So we went back to the drawing board and worked a lot on the ending. And the next test screening that we did, the responses that we got about the emotions that people were left with was angry, ready to fight, motivated, hopeful. You know, like it was they were very different um emotions that you can actually do something with rather than just feeling like, oh my God, I just want to bury my head in the sand. So that's part of it is, you know, trying to figure out how to engage with your audience and how is it working for the audience. And um, I think also having a story that's not complete provides a lot of opportunities for impact. Um, I got my MFA in science and natural history filmmaking, and my focus was on advocacy storytelling and campaign storytelling. So I I have always wanted to work on films that have conjoining impact campaigns and strategies, you know, around using the stories to create change and to build movements. Um, so the fact that the story was not complete, you know, provided a lot of space for awareness and getting people to understand and knowledgeable about this story, to do outreach to the Biden administration as they were coming into office with his transition team. We got the film in front of like 40 members of his transition team and Senate and Secretary Kerry. And, you know, so there was like a lot of I guess momentum because of that, because this was like an ongoing story still. And I think still because it's still not finished. So there's pros and cons to it. You know, it from a storytelling perspective, it made it a lot more complicated, but from an impact and outreach and, you know, like real life scenarios, it's made it interesting for sure.
I'm curious if you know of any of the plaintiffs being involved in other cases, like in their home states at this point, or is it sort of, I mean, this seems like it's been a big chunk of their life at this point to be involved in the Juliana case specifically.
Yeah. So Levi is he's a plaintiff in the Florida case, along with several other plaintiffs, and that case has been moving forward. I don't know exactly where it is right now, but he is a state plaintiff in that case. Kelsey was a co-lead plaintiff in the Oregon case that went to the Oregon Supreme Court. Um, Trying to think if any of the others. Uh, Scott was in a petition for rulemaking case in Colorado, but that case was dismissed. And Jamie was in a case in Arizona. She was the state plaintiff in Arizona, and that case is also no longer active. Those were early cases. Um, yeah, but a lot of these plaintiffs were only plaintiffs on the Juliana case. And like I've talked before on other Q&As, and I think it's really good for people to understand that these kids come from really different backgrounds. Some of them come from environmental activism, climate backgrounds, like Scott, like Kelsey, and some of them don't, like Jaden from Louisiana or Levi from Florida. You know, they were not used to being in the spotlight. They were not activists. All of these plaintiffs experienced harm, and that was an absolute requirement for them to be plaintiffs on the case and to be able to prove standing. But some of them were much more comfortable as activists and in the limelight and had been, in this work and kind of doing this climate work for a long time, and some hadn't. So that was also really interesting to just like, see their comfort levels and their experiences throughout this whole process based on some of that past history or even just like community and family support that some had or didn't have.
Yeah, because you spent as much time, I'm sure, like interacting with the families and being in their hometown as covering the broader case. I thought that was such an incredible part of the whole storytelling as well.
Yeah.
Background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I'm curious about when you knew this, the moment you knew this was going to be a story you really wanted to tell, like what was the spark that started this whole journey for you into creating a film around this?
Well, my partner that I did that I worked on the trust films with, Kelly Matheson, she was a director of programming at Witness, and she and I became really good friends while we were working on the trust series films. She also still had a home in Bozeman, and so when she would come to Bozeman and visit, we would hang out together. And she was still working for Witness at that time, and she was they had transferred her to Amsterdam, and she was working for the International Criminal Court and working on human rights and environmental issues around the world, but always had a deep love in her heart for climate litigation. And she had actually, I think maybe already at that point, been asked to be on the board of our Children's Trust. So she, was really following what was happening with that. And she and I were actually hiking in the bear trap on the Madison outside of Bozeman the day that Judge Aiken's decision came back. We were like out on this trail hiking, and she checked her phone and saw that Judge Aiken had ruled in the plaintiff's favor. And she and I had been talking already for like a year about, like we really felt like there was a longer story to tell, and didn't know how to do it, and didn't know if it was going to be this story or how this case was going to turn out. And so we're out on this hike, and we get Judge Aiken's ruling, and we were like, this is it. This is it. This is what I'm doing. And she was like, Christy, this is what you have to do now that this is yours. And so that was we both still talk about that, just being, out in nature on this hike, and just kind of that moment of really realizing like this is what I wanted to do. This was the story I wanted to tell, and I needed to do whatever it took to try to follow it.
Nice.
Any other questions?
Has the film been shown at the documentary film festival, Big Sky? Have you submitted it?
Yes, we screened at Big Sky, I believe in 2021, I think. Yeah. Yeah. And also IWFF
Yeah.
as well. Yeah. And the Bozeman Film Festival too. So it got a lot of love in Montana, which was great.
I'm curious what story you're excited to tell next, or because you still work with Barrelmaker, right? Like that's still
Barrelmaker is my company. Yeah, I've actually had a lot of transitions this past year. My husband and I, we sold our home in Bozeman in October and moved down to Colorado, and we're also partly transitioning to Costa Rica. So I've been very involved in like a lot of personal transitions this year of renovating my home, getting it sold, trying to build our house down there, and transitioning back to Colorado, which is where I grew up. So this last year has been a lot of like personal stuff for me. But I am currently on the board of an environmental organization down in Costa Rica, and I'm trying to, I'm working a lot of the work that we're doing is focused on illegal development or irresponsible development, and also gentrification and displacement of locals. So there's some stories down there. And that's like just like legal work that we're doing, but I'm really interested in trying to tell some of these stories down there. There's a lot of conservation stories down in Costa Rica that are of great interest to me. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what that is and what I'm doing. I'm also helping produce a narrative feature, which is a new thing for me because I've been in the doc world since 2009. So this is it's a filmmaker from Boulder who is telling a story about a Navajo botanist who is traversing down the Colorado River in the future, in the not too distant future, when we have a major water crisis in the West. And so it's kind of there's a climate justice story, an indigenous rights, water rights story, and I'm kind of helping her, figure out what that impact campaign looks like for that, because it's not very common to have impact campaigns for narrative stories, but this is a story that we both really feel like it definitely we could do a lot of impact around the Colorado River and water and climate around this story. So we're in the fundraising development stages of that film right now, and I'm trying to help her tell that story.
Very cool.
That's super exciting. Well, we'll stay tuned for the development in that. Anything else folks in the room would like to say? Libby, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Christy, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for showing the film again, and thanks for rallying behind the health plaintiffs and keeping the momentum going in Montana. It's tough times right now, but we have to keep resisting and keep showing up and doing this work.
Well, thanks for
Thank you.
joining us.
Thank you.
Well,
Okay, take care, guys.
Thank you.